Have you guys ever played out a situation over and over again in your head and asked yourself, was I the asshole in this situation? Should I have done something different? Is this person actually the unreasonable one? I feel like a lot of the times for neurodivergent people, that whole process could be a little bit more difficult and muddy to try to figure out, because a lot of the times we can struggle with rejection sensitivity dysphoria. We could struggle with having low self-esteem, being unsure of ourselves, and almost taking accountability to a fault. And I'm not saying taking accountability is a bad thing. I think taking accountability is a beautiful trait and everyone should have it. But it could begin to wear down on your sense of self-worth when you are constantly taking accountability for things that are just not your responsibility, or it's not something that you should be taking accountability for, right? So I made a post a few days ago asking you guys to submit some scenarios that you've been through currently or in the past, asking whether or not you were the asshole in the situation so that I could read them on today's video and give my genuine thoughts and opinions. I'm actually really excited to read these because I feel like I'm a good type of person to come to about scenarios like this and get actual feedback on that's neutral. When my friends come to me about a certain thing that happened, I don't automatically take their side when I hear out what they went through. I always try to listen to everything that's happened, ask questions, and be neutral. Maybe even hold my friend accountable if I need to. Let's say they did something that I didn't think was right. I would point that out and say, you know what, I don't think that was quite right, and this is why. But I also blah, 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 the other person or the situation. I never try to say definitive things like this is right, this is wrong. You were right in the situation, they were wrong, vice versa. Hopefully this video is actually helpful and interesting to listen to rather than something that's for pure entertainment of like, oh, these crazy things are happening and then I'm just making fun of it or being very bombastic about it. I'm gonna genuinely try to respond the best that I can. All right, so I'm gonna keep everyone's submissions anonymous here just because not everyone wants to put it out there like that. Am I the asshole for cutting out someone who needed support? Earlier this year, I cut out a friend I made through work. I left the job due to burnout. We kept in touch, but I realized outside of work, I didn't really enjoy their company. In fact, I was quite stressed whenever they were around. I felt as though a lot of boundaries were overstepped, but in their defense, I didn't communicate very well. On one particular day, they insisted on staying over just so they could clean my house. I struggled a lot with my mental health at the time, so cleaning my apartment was especially challenging at the time. I later discovered over this past year that I am ADHD, so looking back, no wonder it freaked me out. I told myself I was overreacting at the time because it was a nice thing that they were trying to do. I want to make it clear that they didn't ask if they could clean my house. They just said, I can't stand this anymore. I'm going to have to clean your place. And I didn't know how to tell them to stop. I had one of the worst meltdowns I've ever had after they left. Things weren't back in the right place, and although it was tidy, it was way worse for me to cope with than when it was messy. I was speaking to a therapist at the time, and she agreed that it would be best if I communicated that I wanted space from them, so I did. I planned how to do it in person in a safe and controlled environment, so I could leave it at any moment if I felt stressed. This was also the day they started the conversation with pretty heavy stuff that they were going through, matters that I won't go into detail about, but matters that they should be going to the police about. I felt awful because I also know they don't have a good support system at home. I checked in to see who else they had told and decided that there were at least some people that I knew that would be a good support to them. But to be honest, the whole time I was freaking out because I had planned to let them know I needed space. I had planned to use I statements and make it more about my ADHD diagnosis. This was before my autism diagnosis, but I couldn't help but to feel like it was an excuse. I ended up not telling them about needing space because it was so overwhelming. I was so stressed by the plot twist of their news that I couldn't bring myself to do it in person, so I sent a text message instead. I did have good times with this person, and they are a good person because I guess I've highlighted the negatives a lot here. But the guilt has been with me for months, as I have no idea if I am the asshole in this situation. From what I hear, they don't blame me for it, but that's just what I hear from other people. Also, please be kind and constructive about both me and this person, just two 19-year-olds trying their best. All right, so I just want to first say that this is a really difficult situation because it's one of those things where it's not necessarily about who is the bad guy. And a lot of the times situations don't have a bad guy. And that's what we don't understand. I think our society on both ends of the spectrum are so used to trying to find who the villain is in the scenario to almost justify the treatment of that person or you cutting that person out of your life, when in reality, no one is necessarily just a villain. We're all just humans. We all impact each other negatively and positively. We have the potential for both. It's that simple. I know it's really difficult to be able to communicate all of these needs that you had along the way. For example, feeling stressed out about the person continuously whenever you're around them, up until them going to your house and almost forcing to clean your house for you against your will. Like, I understand that you weren't able to communicate that they were overstepping boundaries. In that sense, I do empathize for that person and you, because I feel like if that person had known, they probably wouldn't have crossed those boundaries, right? Let's say this person is a good person. I think for a lot of us, we just don't know sometimes what is okay with a person or what's not. Sometimes we can only approach situations from the perspective of, I feel like I would appreciate it if someone came and cleaned my house for me, or I know other people that would appreciate that. And we think that we're doing you a favor, when in reality, it's not necessarily a favor to you. It's something that would actually send you into a meltdown. I highlighted this in my last video where we're talking about invisible expectations. This is a really good example why it's so important to establish clear communication, because everyone has different expectations and needs. And so the only way to know how to not step over someone's boundaries or how to help them is for that person to actually communicate it to you, because that then gives you a choice as to whether or not you want to cross their boundaries or to respect their boundaries. Again, it's all about consent. When I read your situation, I'm seeing the lack of consent on both ends. You're not giving them a chance to consent to how they could be a friend to you. And they're also not giving you a choice of consent as to how you could receive and experience their friendship. I will say the only difference here is that they, in the situation of cleaning your house, at least stated what their intention was and what they wanted to do. So you could say like they gave you an opportunity to consent to it. So you could have told them, you know what, I don't really want that right now, right? You kind of just let them do what they wanted to do. But this kind of goes into the whole topic of communicating what your needs are. I feel like that's really difficult for neurodivergent people because our needs are a lot of the time so specific to us and aren't necessarily the norm of what other people's needs are. And so we could feel really unsafe to express our needs. We could feel like expressing our needs is unnecessary, unwanted, and would sometimes even put a target on our backs or make someone judge us less because of it or judge us negatively because of it. And so it's almost easier to just keep masking and going with the flow, even though it doesn't feel good to us. But the only way to begin to fight against those social norms that aren't necessarily serving a lot of people is to begin to express what those needs are and what those boundaries are, and to begin to integrate that into our lives. Because yes, it may seem abnormal at first, but imagine if everyone did that, or if more and more people started to express their individualistic needs. It becomes less weird, and it helps build space for other people to express their needs and not receive negative reactions from it. Because as people get used to other people's needs more and more, they could think to themselves, oh, they're just different from me. They have this need, I have another need, that's okay. just like how other people have other needs similar to them or similar to me, but it's whatever, right? You kind of build spaces for other people to be themselves and speak up, right? But if we all end up shutting our mouths and not speaking on what our needs are, it continues to enable and perpetuate those closed-minded spaces, if that makes sense. And so, although the difficulty also stems from very valid fears and experiences, I think it's always beneficial to, and again, use your discernment for people to be able to speak up on, okay, that's actually not cool with me. I don't want you to clean my space right now. I understand it's really messy and it's stressing you out. So maybe we could just leave my apartment because I don't feel okay with you cleaning it. So what's the compromise here, you know? And that's the thing is, again, for neurodivergent people, we have to try to begin to figure out ways to make friendships and relationships with other people more sustainable. Because it's not sustainable to continually grit your teeth and let people kind of just like wash over you with their wants and needs, and you are just there taking it all the time until you can't take it anymore and you have to cut the person out and burn the bridge. I don't think we want to be lonely or to cut people out of our lives, because we do need support and community to be able to be happy and to survive. So we need to figure out ways to make those relationships actually sustainable, feel good to us, and support us, rather than creating a dynamic where we're constantly supporting the other person and what their needs are and then being taken advantage of again and again. Even though the other person's not necessarily taking advantage of you, you're just not necessarily showing up in the relationship and stating what your needs are, right? Because I don't think it's fair to make yourself the victim. And I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying I don't think it's fair for, let's say, us neurodivergent people to talk about, okay, these are all the ways that people step over our boundaries, while simultaneously we never state those boundaries are there and we don't give them an opportunity to actually respect those boundaries. Because a lot of the times people do want to respect those boundaries. They just need to know what those boundaries are. I've had very similar experiences to you. I've had a friend like this where they had an unfortunate life. Like sometimes it is what it is, right? Like sometimes we are set up in a way where we just aren't supported or loved like other people are. And sometimes we meet other people that go through that same hardship. And I think especially when you have empathy, you could use that as an excuse to forgive them stepping over your boundaries again and again until you just can't take it anymore. But I don't think that's, again, healthy for either person, because they also aren't given the opportunity to show up in a way that could support the people they love and care about, and then ultimately feel good about themselves and the value they could bring into your life, right? This is like a collective thing. You have to give them an opportunity to feel like they can actually be valued to you as well, because it doesn't feel good for them either to be cut out randomly and to be told all the things they did wrong when they may not necessarily know they were doing something wrong. So again, it's difficult, yes, but it's always good to just be clear and to give each other opportunities to meet each other's needs and to communicate what those needs are. And it's never black and white. I'm sure there's times where you are going to be in a place where you can support them through those very difficult situations. And there's going to be times where you may not be in the place to support them, but you just have to let them know. Say like, you know what, I'm struggling with my mental health this month. I can't take listening to your hardships because I'm too empathetic, and I'm gonna really have that energy stick to me for a long time, and I just can't afford to do that. Is there another way for us to be able to connect and regulate together, or just enjoy each other's company without needing to dip too much into that? You know, you kind of just have to create different ways for you guys to connect rather than just one way, and you either could connect in that way or you can't. You could either be friends with them in that specific way or you can't be friends with them at all, you know, because it doesn't have to be that difficult. Both people could get their needs met. You just have to talk about it. The amount of times I've cut out good friends or lost out on really good friendships because I wasn't communicating my needs is crazy. And now that I'm 27, about to turn 28, I can look back and think to myself, you know what? I wish I could have communicated those needs a lot more clearly and given the other person an opportunity to show up for me rather than just cutting them off completely and never even giving them a chance. Okay, so the next one says, am I the asshole for ignoring ingenuine questions? I can tell almost right away when people are initially asking me questions to get to know me and then continuing to ask them for their own entertainment because I answer them weirdly. Like when people can just sniff the autism off of you and then ask you practically anything just to push your buttons. And it takes so much energy to answer because I actually put thought into it and I want to embrace the social interaction. I don't want to assume the person's just messing with me, so I let it go on a bit. But by the time I realize it, I'm already their little pet. Most of the questions technically aren't harmful. It's the opinion questions that annoy me. Do you like my outfit? Pick between me or her. Do you like this artist? They're never prepared for an honest answer and are immediately offended. The straightforwardness they were so amused by is now a green light for them to make rude and passive-aggressive comments towards me, all because I refuse to fit into their narrative. How can people expect me to constantly be polite when they can't even offer me genuineness? I think it's unfair. Now I'm wondering if it's okay for me to just stop answering at all to people like this. Would I then be the bully because I'm assuming bad intentions out of people, or am I justified because neurotypicals judge us even harder based on our first impressions? Okay, so this is something that I feel like is super common in neurodivergent people. I see it again and again in my clients or in your guys' experiences where we observe a situation and we try to find a way to respond to it or cater to it after the fact. And I want us to not necessarily get rid of that sort of way of dealing with things, but to perhaps add a different way to deal with it, which is just to respond to the situation at hand when it happens. And instead of trying to cater your responses to the person, cater your responses to how you feel. So if I feel uncomfortable, how do I want to respond? And that's the most important thing to me, is knowing that neurodivergent people out there have agency over their interactions and their responses instead of constantly catering their responses to everyone else. A lot of neurodivergent people can build up resentment over time or build up resentment over a certain situation happening because after the fact, if it doesn't work out in a way or it makes us feel really uncomfortable, we could begin to ruminate and think, oh my God, that really bothers me because I felt like I didn't have a say in that situation, or if I could go back, I would do this differently. When in reality, all we have power over is ourselves and what we do in that moment. But either way, it's kind of like you are allowing yourself to have control over yourself and your life and how you would want to feel and not leaving it up to them. Because if you're constantly catering yourself and your reactions to the other person, you're putting yourself in a state where you're constantly analyzing and waiting for their response to then figure out what you want to do next. And that puts you in that waiting position, waiting on them all the time. And that just doesn't feel good, because if this person's already making you feel uncomfortable where you have to be doing that mental work, they're most likely people where you don't want to be doing that mental work for, right? And adjusting yourself so much for them. Like, that mental work should be used for people who can actually collaborate with you on interactions in terms of meeting each other's needs and making each other feel heard. But if someone doesn't really care about you or doesn't really care about how you're feeling or how they're affecting you, you should just continue to utilize your own discernment and your agency over your actions and not really care about what they are doing or what they're not doing or what you want to do to them or in response to them in the future. Let's say this person is that person who's just trying to instigate stuff, because people are just like that. They're not necessarily an asshole. I'm sure they're good to other people in their life or whatever, but some people just like to push buttons, and some people take that as banter and they like it. Other people, we would feel uncomfortable with it and we don't know how to read it. So instead of trying to figure out how to respond to them to make the interaction more smooth, just think to yourself, do you want to interact with them? Do you want to continue feeling uncomfortable? If not, how do you want to deal with that? You know? So the next one says, am I the asshole for not wanting to go see my family? So my family is very split up. My mom and dad are divorced, and my dad has 4 kids from 3 different women. It's safe to say it's hectic enough with just us. Every year, my nan on my dad's side made it a tradition to go around and have a meal/evening before Christmas. I used to like going when I was smaller, but as I got older, I started to like it less. It became more overwhelming and it would change my weekend routine. This year, I really didn't want to go, and people kept pushing me to go because it was a tradition and something that they were looking forward to. Being pressured, I gave in and went for a couple hours. I told my dad by the end of the hour or two that I wanted to go home. My nan fought me on this, but I insisted that I was going home. I had already had a meltdown that morning, and to this day, I don't know whether it's something I should suck up and deal with for other people, or if I should pay attention to my sensory sensitivities and dislike for social situations and just do what's right for me. I think, again, like the first situation, usually what the right thing to do, and I'm not saying what I'm going to say is right. I feel like what is usually best for the situation is an in-between. So yes, you should address your sensory sensitivities and dislikes with a person, but that doesn't necessarily always have to equate to you cutting the person out or removing yourself from the situation altogether. There is a way to still be with people, connect with people, be in a situation, and get your needs met. And that could happen in a bunch of different ways. So let's talk about that. If I were to put myself in your shoes in this situation, I want to think to myself, what are my sensory sensitivities that makes me not want to go to this family event, and come up with that list. And then I would ask myself, if I could get all of these accommodations so that I don't have to deal with these sensory sensitivities, would I still want to show up and be around family? What if you do want to see certain family members because you don't see them often? What if you do like that tradition, right? What if you do want to connect, but all of these other sensory sensitivities just take precedence over that, and it makes you want to avoid all of that altogether? Begin to figure out ways to get those accommodations. Begin to figure out what your boundaries are. Communicate that to the people involved. Communicate what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Show up in that situation how you feel comfortable to show up, and they could either respect it or not respect it. If they don't respect it, then yes, that would be a time for you to either re-establish that boundary, to give them another chance, or to remove yourself from the situation, because you're like, I already told you what I was willing to do to show up, and if you just aren't letting me, then I can't show up anymore, right? It's that simple. Instead of just going so black and white as to like, I either show up and do everything in the ways that other people want me to, or I don't show up at all and respect my sensory sensitivities. For example, if I was in a similar situation in my family dynamic, let's say hypothetically, the family is very loud and they like to have a bunch of conversations about superficial things. That could be something that I dislike and wears down on me and takes away my spoons. So my boundary that I set for myself and the accommodations I could set for myself is, okay, Irene, I'm going to go to this family event. I'm going to choose one person that I generally get along with, and I'm going to stick with them and talk to them for the whole entirety of me being there, instead of forcing myself to make conversation with everyone. I think just sticking to that one person can help me maintain my spoons a little bit better and allow me to feel a lot less burnt out, or I won't shut down as intensely. That is the boundary I'm setting for myself. And I could communicate that to my grandma. I could say, you know what, Grandma, to be honest, these family gatherings are super overstimulating for me because, one, there's so many noises going on. There's so many people. I don't know how to conversate with anyone. I have a lot of social anxiety. There's a lot of sensory sensitivities there. And so it takes a lot out of me. And to be honest, my natural instinct is to just not want to go. But you know what? Tradition is really important to me. Family is really important to me. So this is where that reassurance comes in. You know, I do like tradition. I do like family. I do want to see you guys. It's just I'm struggling with all of these sensory sensitivities. So if you see me only really sticking to one person, or I'm not really interacting with people, or if you see me taking a lot of breaks in the bathroom or going outside on walks by myself, it's not because I don't want to be around you guys. It's just me taking little breaks for myself so that I could continue to spend the night and the evening with you guys. Just kind of explaining what's going on with you and what you're going to do, not necessarily for their approval, but just to let them know what you're going to do, because you're going to do it regardless, right? That's a very gentle way of basically setting a boundary. It's a gentle and assertive way to be like, this is how I'm going to show up. This is why I'm going to show up this way. You kind of just have to be good with it and understand it and respect it. If you keep pushing back on it or forcing me outside of that, then that's going to be an indication for me to set another boundary and be like, you know what? If you're not allowing me to show up as I need to, then that just means I can't show up at all. I wish I could show up, right? I wish I could be here, but you're not letting me. So then that could let the other person know, if that were to ever happen, I'm leaving because of you, because you're not respecting me. I'm not choosing that because of me. I am doing what I need to do to be able to show up and be here. You had to just respect me, respect those boundaries. And if you're not able to do that, then you are making that choice for me to now remove myself. Does that make sense? Again, I want to keep promoting healthy communication, clear communication of what your needs are, what your boundaries are, what your intentions are. Sometimes we just need someone to like say it out loud and give examples for us to be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let me put that into practice. And it's tricky because sometimes people can respect that right off the bat, and that's great. Sometimes people, especially if they've known you for a while, for your whole life, for a few years, you establishing that clear communication and boundaries, needs and accommodations might be very different for them. So they may not know how to respond. So therefore they may not know how to respect it. That's to an extent expected. Just be patient with people like that and go into it knowing this person may not know how to respect my boundaries. So what does it mean for me to have to teach them how to respect my boundaries? Because oftentimes we expect, once we figure out how to communicate clearly and effectively, that people should respond positively. And when they don't, we are like, oh my God, I need to cut you out. When in reality, we have to give, especially family members and loved ones, a chance to be able to make that transition. And us as neurodivergents, especially autistics, could understand the pain of those drastic changes. Like, it takes a while for everyone, neurodivergent or not, to be able to see something new and be like, oh, how do I respond to this, right? So to an extent, if you are communicating different, showing up different in any way, give your family an opportunity to make that transition, to make space for that new you, right? Instead of having those unrealistic expectations of them being able to know how to respond and to just completely accept you right off the bat. Like, maybe you do have to put some labor or extra labor in the beginning of all of this to help them integrate that new you or your new needs and wants into that new relationship dynamic. And that's something that I've explored pretty intensely with some of my clients, is what are ways that we could have patience and hold space while we educate our family members and loved ones on what it means to understand who we are as autistic or neurodivergent individuals, and how to respect and understand what our new accommodations, boundaries, and needs are. And just because they don't know how to respond doesn't mean they don't love and care about us, right? It's not helpful to make that snap judgment. A lot of the times they do want to learn, they do want to understand, they do want to show up and to make space for us. We just have to do that labor on teaching them how, and they have to do the labor on trying to integrate that into the relationship dynamic. It takes two, right? It's a very nuanced dance that all of us have to partake in. If there's any positive about that, is in the beginning, it does take intention and work, but as you keep being consistent with it over time, it compounds off each other and it just gets easier. Okay, so am I the asshole for pointing out a coworker is venting to me? Her and I speak on and off about being writers, but she often starts dominating the conversation about herself. I asked her how she was doing in an online boot camp that she joined, and she said she was behind because she couldn't figure out some computer issues. I asked her if there's anyone she could ask about it, and she said no, but then went into a rant of how her family doesn't like her and she's the black sheep for trying to inform them of the matrix society has us under, and that they call her crazy. After leaving the convo 2 hours later, she comes back and starts talking to me again unprompted about her family and what they're doing to her and how they're crazy for calling her crazy. I couldn't help it at that point, and I called out the fact that she seems to want to get this off her chest, and that I only asked about if she had someone to ask about her computer issues, not all these family issues. She told me I was being rude and walked away. Now she's decided that we shouldn't talk anymore, and she's avoiding me like I'm contagious. Am I the asshole? So I do think the way that you responded to her was a little bit insensitive because she was talking about something that's clearly very sensitive for her. I don't think it's necessarily right for her to go into talking about it without necessarily checking in on if you're in the right headspace for it. Because again, maybe you weren't in the right headspace to be able to listen to all of that and to be able to emotionally process it and give her feedback for it or support her through it. But at the same time, we're all human, right? And I don't think we should necessarily be encouraging people to be scared of sharing their hardships to others.
Do you know what the most exhausting type of friend is?
Okay, since being on TikTok, I've learned people don't want the anxious friend, the people pleaser friend, the angry friend, the too chill friend, the friend that always wants to go out, the bougie friend, the loud friend, the too quiet friend, the chronically online friend, the friend that doesn't know anything that's going on, the avoidant friend, the friend that thinks they're better, the friend that has low self-esteem, the woke friend, the friend that does too much, the friend that doesn't do enough, the traumatized friend, the needy friend, the friend that's too independent, the friend that has the unhealthy relationship, the friend that has a very, very healthy relationship. I don't get it. I don't think y'all just want friends. I don't know.
We're human. We're bound to have slip ups. We're bound to just like vent about something really quick just because it's on our mind, and we may not factor in every single time maybe the other person doesn't want to hear it. Because honestly, if you're already thinking about something that's taking up all that headspace and is bothering you, you're probably not thinking about whether or not your friend or other people are in the right headspace to be able to hear that, right? Because the last thing we want to do is to make other people pay for their human qualities because it's overstepping a boundary that we may have, but they may not know is there. You know what I'm saying? Because it makes those out there who actually have empathy and actually care for others be scared to show up and be human. It makes us scared to depend on other people and to trust other people because we think it's too much, right? There's so many times we hear on social media other people complaining about how others are stepping over their boundaries and they should have clearly known or they should have known better, when in reality, regardless of how obvious those boundaries are, it's just not our jobs to constantly keep into account what boundaries other people may or may not have if they're not willing to tell us in general or in that moment that there's a boundary there that we need to respect, or else there's some sort of consequence that's going to follow up, right? I feel like that video perfectly highlights that whole dynamic of what happens when people aren't effective communicators and aren't willing to be straightforward communicators and harbor that resentment and or make other people pay for those invisible boundaries being crossed consistently. I feel like it's more sustainable for us to just be in charge of our own actions, right? To manage ourselves. So in that instance, the onus is on you to be able to communicate, okay, I wasn't ready to hear you vent, so I need to speak up on it. Yo, there's a boundary right there and you just stepped over it. Can we take a second and back up off that boundary real quick? They can either be like, oh shoot, yeah, you're totally right, I'm so sorry. Whoops, I should have checked in with you first. Or they could be like, you know what, I am entitled to talk to you about this stuff for whatever reason. And you could just deal with that as you would want to. But to just kind of hold your breath and to let her continue to overstep your boundary without saying anything, and then to then respond by leaving the conversation, then to have her come and overstep that boundary a second time, and then almost falter for it and make her pay the consequences for it by being a little bit more blunt and less empathetic and saying, I didn't ask to hear your family issues, is a little bit insensitive. Contextually, from her perspective, that is hurtful, right? Because then it makes you feel like, oh my God, I feel completely unsupported and rejected, and I feel like crap. This person doesn't even see that I'm struggling right now. I'm an inconvenience to them. And it just doesn't feel good. It's a different situation if you said once or maybe even twice, I don't want to hear about that. I asked about the computer issues. I'm not in the right headspace to hear family stuff. And she continued to share it anyways. That'll be a good time for you to be like, I asked about the computer stuff. I did not ask about your family situation. It's okay to then be a little bit insensitive and to be a little bit more assertive, right? I can resonate with her. I can also resonate with you. I can resonate with both people, but I could resonate with the fact that there's just times where I don't know if I'm overstepping a boundary, and it makes me almost not want to interact at all because people aren't used to communicating those boundaries. Even if you do step over it the first time, I'm used to people doing basically what you did and just saying something when it's too late, and there's a lot of frustration there and resentment there. I'm seeing like a pattern here of like, we just need to be a lot more clear with communicating our boundaries, communicating our expectations, communicating our intentions, all of that stuff. That's going to be it for today's video of Am I the Asshole? Let me know what you guys think about any of these situations that stuck out to you. Do you guys agree with me in terms of like, there's never really usually a bad or good guy? It's just a lot of like tension built up over the lack of communication and all of that stuff. And do you guys think that there would be these mishaps, and these mishaps would have been as intense if people were just communicating clearly and effectively from the jump through all of these scenarios? If you guys have any Am I the Asshole submissions, feel free to go to my community tab on my YouTube page and submit your Am I the Asshole scenarios on there. You might be able to see me respond to your situation in a future video. But other than that, Christmas is rolling around the corner. I hope you guys take some time to regulate yourselves leading up to the holidays and during the holidays. Thank you guys for watching today's video, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.